Ruby Vasquez, and she is Erica Clare. This is a qualitative analysis on narratives of women from the Western USA-Mexican border regarding social changes, domestic violence, and mental health during the first months of pandemic. We are presenting on behalf of our partners members of the Human Interaction Laboratory in the Universidad Iberoamericana in Tijuana. This presentation is part of a bigger research project on psychosocial effects of COVID in the Mexican-USA border. Here is our agenda. I will present the analysis on social changes, domestic violence, and mental health narratives of women to whom we interviewed between September and November last year.
To begin, there are precedents for both psychological and social effects of confinement. Among others, frustration, stigma, post-traumatic stress disorder, confusion, anxiety, and fear. Women display higher rates in mental health problems in comparison to men. Also, the Organization of American States reports that violence against women intensified due to confinement, and the situation worsened due to the lack of access to public services for the prevention, care, and punishment of violence. Previous studies from the United Nations point out the situation. By 2019, the 29% of homicides occurred in women's homes. This data is consistent with the National Shelter Network in Mexico report, which mentions that throughout the 2020, care for women victims of violence at home increased by 44%, being worse during the last 2 months of the year. Women seek shelter every hour. Moreover, the network estimated that in 75% of cases, the aggressors are their partners. In this study, our aim was to explore the experiences of women, members of families from the Western USA-Mexican border regarding their main changes in social life, indicators of domestic violence, and mental health during the pandemic. The study was run in the northern Mexico-USA border with a qualitative design using in-depth online interviews to explore confinement life experiences in a subsample of 8 women who voluntarily accepted to participate. As you can see, these pins of Google Maps indicate the locations of the participants at the moment of the interviews. As mentioned before, this presentation is part of the data of a mixed method project. Due to this, the participants that we consider qualitatively were invited to participate through the contact information they voluntarily provide us in the quantitative instruments. It was possible to finally set the participation of these 8 women I mentioned in a 42 average of age, and they were interviewed through a video call over Zoom and WhatsApp platform. The interviews last 1 hour in average. They all received a signed digital written consent form. The interviews were audio recorded and verbatim transcribed for the analysis. It is important to highlight that the qualitative interviews explore more dimensions than those considered for this presentation. For the codification and organization of data, we employ Atlas TI platform, and we found 669 codes, from which 195 were on the social changes dimension, 161 for the domestic violence dimension and 163 on the mental health one. Next, we are presenting some quotes that represent the aforementioned dimensions. I pass the voice to Ruby.
Thank you. The social changes that we observe in the discourse refer to transformation in everyday life. Some of them were mobility, the economy, paid and unpaid occupations, the implementation of new actions around the prevention of contagion, among others. Care and child upbringing has been socially assigned to women in the context of pandemic. This implies modification in the way in which they accompany their children of school age, in addition to modifying the associated dynamics, spaces, times, or activities. Among the expression, we find concerns for the education and performance of their children, the implementation of new roles, and even some of them describe a direct link between personal success and the requirements of being a good mother. Part of the economic activity in the border is dependent of the maquiladora industry. Precariousness was pre-existing and worsened with the pandemic. So we can observe unfair wages and job insecurity. This woman illustrates the concern about losing her job, especially given her age, 50 years old, and the change from one job to another with lower income. Likewise, the economic crisis that some companies went through, carrying out massive layoffs and failing to overcome the economic crisis. This section shows the high vulnerability into generational sectors of the population. Children and the elderly as they are considered a population at risk. Their mobility was limited, and this represents problems for single mothers or those without support networks. The binational conditions is common on the border, and due to its closure last year. For non-essential activities, the dynamics of the families were altered, including those related to workers without permits, but with regular employment in the USA. In this quote shows the role of caring for women and its extension even in their absences at home. For example, over the phone. Although the participants explains that her husband is taking care of her daughter, who is actually the expert is she. This reflects the social demands of being a good mother and a good wife. Here we can observe the power relations in the dynamic of the couple, conflicts and violence. The participants assumes that she has to meet her obligation of being tolerant, justifying her husband's behaviors as a male figure, and she minimizes his action to avoid conflict. The technical abuse that women experience is promoted again by social aspects and personal beliefs regarding the role that they should play as mothers or wives. As in the previous slide, we observe a normalization of violence where conflict is assumed as part of daily life. The couple's dynamics of these participants was made before the pandemic by individual occupation and recreational activities. It is noted that the most relevant conflicts occurred after a long period of coexistence due to home office. And now it's Erica.
Thank you, Rubin. We explore mental health in general in the entire study, but here we show about changes in sleep behavior that are considered within the mental health dimension. The associated quote tells us about the loss of motivation, the difficulty of maintaining a routine, and the relationship between mood and sleep. The second participant, the second quote, tells us how she faced the difficulty of obtaining psychiatric medicine and professional care that she needed in the first months of quarantine. It is also observed how, by worrying about the economic situation, she was faced by choosing between her treatment or her financial stability. The reality forces her to go for the financial stability. The effects of the pandemic on emotions were multiple, and factors such as the lack of space and confinement, noise, or living with others aggravated them. Thus, the participant realized that their mood was affected by the information they consumed in relation to COVID and the frequency of its use in daily conversations. Infodemics was then a relevant aspect in the experiences that we found in our participants. Finally, some information, real or false, about COVID remedies or cures conveyed hope, just as it could be happening with the advancement of vaccine applications that we are now worldwide living, experiencing. Finally, I conclude, we found that vulnerability of women in their homes could have worsened during pandemic, in part because of the increase of their roles, as well as their mental health problems increased. Particular dynamics in the border generated particular problems. The end of crossing border life meant losses in many levels, sometimes even the separation of families. On the other hand, a constant justification for psychological violence was observed in the stories. We think that is needed apply psychology research on this topic. We are actually currently working with an intervention with our population regarding the psychological violence. A very big issue has to be with homeschooling. And this represented a psychological challenge, and it requires of emotional and social support for women. Community ed networks would be particularly important to overcome the crisis that is not over yet. And finally, despite misinformation that worsened anxiety and all the other mental health problems, we found that discernment and the appearance of coping strategies were like an organic way after the time that was appearing. And it is probably the result of our resilience process that we were experiencing. We were very happy of sharing this with you, and I would like to thank firstly our women who participate voluntarily in this work, and to the students of our lab, the laboratories of human interaction, and for the research department at the university for the funding. Thank you to all of you for your attention. Please feel free of contacting us. Goodbye.